Hello， 大家好，我係 Professor Lisa Leung， 我係嶺南大學文化研究系嘅一個老師。我哋文化研究其實咧都係一啲即係藉住從日常生活啦所接觸嘅東西，包括係媒體啦、普及文化啦，甚至係一啲嘅生活性嘅一啲嘅課題咧，去思考一啲更加大嘅啲議題，包括文化啦、社會啦、政治啦，甚至經濟嗰啲課題嘅。而我哋嘅課程嘅特色咧，就係不斷係去邀請一啲唔同嘅一啲業界嘅人士啦嚇，甚至係一啲嘅即係知名啲嘅人士咧，去進入我哋嘅課堂裏邊咧，係作出佢哋嘅分享。而我哋咧即將會係推出一系列嘅一啲嘅短片咧，係記錄一啲呢啲嘅所謂客席嘅分享咧，係希望可以令大家更加明白我哋嗰個課程嘅宗旨啦，以及係我哋一啲嘅課堂嘅內容，使到咧大家係即使未係去參與我哋嘅課堂咧，都可以更加了解我哋嗰個關注同埋我哋一啲嘅興趣嘅嚇。咁或者你哋都可以係去 follow 我哋嗰個社交媒體嘅網站啦嚇，係更加了解我哋呢個即係學士嘅課程嚇，同埋我哋一啲嘅即係科目嘅嚇。咁請大家去 enjoy。呢一科咧就係叫做 Media and Creative Industries， 喺中文咧就係媒體與文化創意產業。咁我諗顧名思義咧，就係想探討就係喺今日呢一個所謂數碼化嘅媒體世代，究竟創意工業點樣喺媒體裏邊去展演呢？嚇，特別就係為係今日年青嘅一代咧，其實係點樣可以更加成功地可以掌握到平台化或者社交媒體化嘅年代可以創作嘅或者創造嘅一啲文化嘅創意空間。我諗特別係為年青嘅一代咧係更加有用嘅。
I tentatively named the lecture today the imagined theory of government initiative in Korea's culture industry. If I give you the short conclusion first, then many people, many US media are now explaining the success of the Korean media culture, finding the cause from the Korean government initiative, which is not true. Which is not true. So my now me and then some of my Korean friends are trying really hard to explain what really happened, and how the US media is bombarded with this kind of like a wrong imagination that the success of Korea's culture industries are all indebted to the Korean government, which is, again, I say, not true. I've been teaching in media and communication for the last 20 years. I was also visiting Chinese University of Hong Kong last year. And my major area of study is information and communication technologies and their social impact, creative industries and culture industries, and cinema and then social history. K-pop is now known by almost everybody. And the success of K-pop is now spreading into the other areas of the social life. As Professor Leung just gave you the lecture, the image of nation, Korea, and the image of Korean people, the Korean culture is very much widely known and then uplifted. For example, there was a recent survey by Statista, how popular is K-pop in your country at the moment? This was a survey given to globally. And then some people know it very well, like almost 20%, or another 20%, it's considerably well. And, like almost 30% people probably they are not that much enthusiastic, but they are aware, That means the majority of the people in the world are aware, at least, where K-pop is from and what K-pop is all about. Last year, University of Copenhagen, this is a very good university, the best university in Denmark, but not, a big university in Europe, But still, even this small university started a Korean language and Korean culture program a few years ago. And then in just a few years of time, the number of applications for Korean studies are doubled, you know. So, and then the professor who is managing that program raised the question, you know, hey, her own program is accepting a lot of applications, and then we can only accept only a few out of them. And then why? What makes students make this choice, right? I think this has already happened in Hong Kong many years ago. But what I'm saying is that what happened in Hong Kong 10 years ago, even 20 years ago, is now spreading to a small country like Denmark. And then the young students are choosing to study Korean language and Korean culture for their own, you know, majors. Her answer is clear. BTS, Parasite, or Hallyu, the Korean wave in general, you know, these are the major factors which is influencing the young students to choose to study Korea. And another professor from New Zealand is Stephen Epstein, who is also teaching Korean studies in New Zealand, observes the similar thing, you know, most obviously Hallyu, led by dramas and music.
Excuse me, Shindong, we are still seeing the first slide.
Are you stuck in the first slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
How
sorry,
about now?
sorry. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Now you see the second slide.
Yeah.
Okay, do you see this slide?
Yes, the table. Yes, the graph.
Okay,
yes.
okay, great. I'm sorry.
Thanks a lot.
So this is what I said, you know, that the majority of the global people are aware about the K-pop. And then this is another table that the number of applications to the University of Copenhagen Korean Studies soared, almost doubled in the last few years. And then the reason why is, according to the professors in that area, is because of the Korean wave. So how, you know, what are the reasons why the Korean culture industries have grown so much, and then how it has become so much popular in the global market? There have been a lot of, you know, theories and then studies presented in the past few years. One of them suggested cultural proximity, you know, concept, especially at the beginning, because Hallyu was successful in East Asian countries first in the early 21st century, like 20 years ago. Just yesterday, when I was preparing the lecture, you know, US television, NBC News published this article, you know, how Korean shows are adopted to become Netflix hits. But not only the NBC, but, you know, BBC also reported a lot of pieces on K-pop. Rolling Stone magazine made a big feature stories last year, and it's all because of the BTS or Parasite or Squid Game. But it really started with this, you know, a very old Korean television drama, Winter Sonata. For Professor Lisa Leung, this is probably not that old drama. But for you, this drama is almost the age of yours. You know,
I grew up with it.
2001, first aired in Korea. And then the next year, a Japanese satellite channel purchased the drama simply because the drama was cheap. And they wanted to fill in their like airtime with this cheap Korean drama. But it created a totally unexpected and then unprecedented hit in Japan. And then in the next, you know, few months, the drama was showed again and again and again, 3 times in Japan. And when Winter Sonata made a big presence, it was not alone. You know, the next year, another drama, Da Jiangjun, made a big presence again, especially in China and Hong Kong and Taiwan. You know, I still remember There I visited Hong Kong in 2006 or 7, around that time. And then, everybody's talking about this Korean drama at that time. So I was very surprised at that time. And these two are not just a very, very small examples, few examples. There are 100 other Korean dramas traveled around this East Asian region. So in the first years, many people paying attention on the notion of cultural proximity, why these dramas were so well received in East Asian countries. Then people easily thought that, hey, these countries are sharing the cultural background together. These are all Chinese, Confucius cultures. So they accept, they understand the Korean dramas much deeper and easier than other countries. But then in just a matter of a couple of years of time, these dramas began traveling to beyond East Asia, to the Philippines, to Malaysia, to Indonesia, to Middle East, to South America, and eventually to Europe. So the cultural proximity hypothesis soon lost its explanatory power. Hey, it has nothing to do with the Confucius culture. The dramas penetrate into totally different cultural settings. So people began talking about the hybridity and then the notion of hybridization. Well, this is not about cultural proximity, but maybe Korean producers are keen on hybridizing the Western mode of entertainment with some unique Korean cultural thing, which might be looking, just interesting. So hybridization became a catchword at that time, replacing the cultural proximity. Now, still, many people are talking about the hybridization of global culture, global media culture. And some people are talking about the state cultural policies in Korea, Korean nation, Korean state planned and then implemented a wonderful, project and support, which brought a big success in cultural industries. Yet some people are paying attention on the uniqueness of Korean fandom, not only Korean fandom, but the global fandom around Korean pop, like BTS fandom, like ARMY, and also there's been a talk about the social media and the internet, and Korea is very advanced in the information technologies, so that helped the development of Korean, things. I would say these kind of approaches bear some utility, but they are not, giving us a complete picture, and they are flawed, and they are probably not really correct all the time. Even if they have some limited explanatory power, there is some state policies, there's some hybridization, there's some cultural proximity, but all these things, fandom, are not uniquely Korean or Korean culture. This exists everywhere. If you are looking at the American culture, or British culture, it's all there, Every modern culture is hybridized and culturally proximity. Every state pays the development, attention on the development of their culture and creative industries. Fandom is, everywhere, And recently, me and my friend published a paper about the digital transformation in media co-evolution as a distinctive element for and then the most reliable explanation for the development of K-pop. And eventually, I believe the accumulation of cultural capital in the Korean society offers the most holistic approach in explaining the success of Korean media culture. Okay. Let me go back to the initial slide. So if we are looking at the success factors of the Korean wave, we can find a lot of different factors working together, not just one or two, and they can be broken down into two big baskets. One is micro or domestic factors. The other one is macro and international factors. Micro factors, I would say the competitive market formation in media industries in Korea. Korean market for media industries have been really competitive and then fully developed in the last 20, 30 years, or even further, at least 30 years. And development of production technology, production of movies, dramas, shows, the production technology has been uniquely developed. It's not, you can't really find out for example, show format of Korean TV from anywhere else. No American TV, no British TV, no like Japanese TV is producing a Korean style, show programs like Fa Fa Chinar, for example, like Chinese adopted. And the accumulation of cultural capital on both production and consumption is really, really important. And ICT infrastructure and social media penetration, also a important factor existing in Korea. And at the macro level, and many people do not even pay attention on this, but this is, I think, is really important, that the collapse of the Cold War antagonism in East Asia and global society from 1980s. China and Korea was an enemy state. We are not visiting each other until 1992, okay? We waged the war together against each other. So when I was at your age, I was not even dream to visit China myself, for the rest of my life. But actually, 15 years later, I was already visiting China and then giving lectures to the Chinese students. So the collapse of the Cold War system in East Asia throughout 1980s and early 1990s really created a environment for the cultural flow. And then when China adopted a capitalist market system after Deng Xiaoping, the expansion of Chinese media market was enormous. China established a lot of regional broadcasting stations, hundreds of them. And then when they created like local broadcasting stations in 1990s, they suddenly found out there's no content to fill in, okay? So they began importing programs, not only from Korea, but from Japan, from other countries, including even North Korea and from the Western societies. In the 1990s, we also saw the cultural globalization and the increase of global trade. So it's not only the Korean product themselves, but the environment, the global environment was opening for the proliferation of cultural goods traveling across the border lines. So this was a kind of important background. But when, now I'm moving to the role of the state, or the government in developing the Korean culture industries. After the success of the BTS and the Parasite and then Squid Game, now the Western media or global media are putting out a lot of coverages. Even South China Morning Post is also putting out articles on K-pop almost regularly, almost maybe once a month or once in every other month. You'll find something about Korean media thing, from Hong Kong media. But it's not only Hong Kong media, but somewhere in American media, almost every week, some media is putting out an article about, K-pop. And this is a business consultant professional site in which he posted a lengthy analytical article about the role of the Korean state with the title of The Rise of Korea's Cultural Economy and Pop Culture. And then he's providing his own analysis on the reason why Korea is succeeding in media culture. And I can't give you the full article, but he's giving a fair explanation and analysis. But I want to bring your attention that this guy is also putting a lot of emphasis on the role of the government, like continuous support from the Korean government. Okay, this is only one very small part out of his article, but also very important part. He is finding out the reason why Korea could make a big success from the continuous support from the Korean government. Here's another report from CNN, which is also saying the government has also backed the expansion of the country's culture industry abroad, seeing it as a vehicle for soft power. There is another popular website in which they are analyzing the success of the Dynamite, the BTS, in a very friendly format for young people. And again, they are emphasizing the role of the government like this. Hallyu didn't arise from nowhere. It began as a deliberate strategy orchestrated by the Korean government in response to a changing global economy. And its rise can be tied directly to Korea's economic, geopolitical, and cultural role in the 20th century. I would say the first part is totally wrong, but the second part is kind of correct. The rise of the cultural economy cannot be detached from the Korea's economic, geopolitical, and cultural, proliferation. That's true. But if you say it was carefully orchestrated by the Korean government, planned, supported, it's wrong. It's just mythical, fake theory. Because simply it was not that important. I'm not saying Korean state didn't do anything, okay? Korean state tried to find their role, positively. But the function or the role carried out by the Korean government in terms of developing the Korean media culture, media industries, was never been so much powerful. Okay, it's only, but then why the state role is perceived as major factors, when it's not true. I found out a few reasons. First is a conventional practice of bureaucracy, like self-serving website information, public diplomacy purpose, Many people who are interested in knowing why Korea made a success, one of the first things they do is Googling, And if you Google Korean pop culture success factors, you can easily find out the Ministry of Culture and Tourism website in Korea. And then that usually becomes the starting point for gathering the information. And if you are visiting the ministry sites, what can you expect? The ministries are not only Hong Kong, Korean ministry, but if you are visiting the Hong Kong's Bureau of Culture, they are giving the same thing. They are giving you what they did, how they did, with their intention. So all the beautiful stories are there, A Korean government decided to push and help the development of pop industry, and then so we allocate this amount of money. We started this kind of project, but you will never be able to find out what the real impact of their projects, because they don't know. There's no evaluation, there's no like a way of knowing what kind of contribution they actually made, you know. So from the website, you're only finding out that the government tried to do these beautiful things. Now, on the other hand, you're observing the success of the K-pop everywhere, you know. So there is a big gap between the government intention and then the realistic outcome. But the people who are visiting the website are almost automatically link them together by themselves. Okay, now I found out that the Korean government does all these kind of beautiful projects. That's why we are seeing this success. Plus, Korean government is not only, self-serving through their website information, but also they are actively engaging in public diplomacy through Korean Culture Center in Hong Kong, Korean embassies everywhere. They are spreading the successful stories of K-pop. So that's easily inviting a fake images that, wow, this is all done by the Korean government. Second factor, the conventional practice of journalism. Again, the journalists are relying on official source. So they are also visiting the ministry website or the institutions under government. They are visiting there, they're downloading the report, and they are citing them. So when their journalistic practice is producing an article totally based on or rely upon the government source, their stories ending up, likewise. So, and then secondly, they are also relying on convenient commentator. They want to take, in many of the journalistic practice, they want to cite a comment from like a government person or some professors, and then they are using it in such a partial way, only to justify what they are covering. So this conventional practice of journalism is intensifying the wrong image of the state role. There's also an amateur advocator. So if you go to the YouTube, I see, unfortunately, just, enthusiasts who are crazy about the, success of the K-pop, and they are very much excited, and then they provide their own personal interpretation. Has nothing to do with the academic analysis or scientific evidence, but out of their imagination, their wishful thinking, they give really irresponsible observation how Korea's making a big success, and then these people are also cited by cheap journalism, And finally, there is another not direct, but related factor, which is Korea's unique history of economic development. Like in Hong Kong, Korea's unique history of economic development is relied upon government initiative in the 1960s and 70s. We call this, the scholars in international political economy is named it as state-led export-oriented development model. It's rather long, but which is also close to the Taiwanese approach, or Singaporean and Hong Kong. Singaporean and Hong Kong is a bit different, but still very much export-oriented development model. State-led part is a bit different, but Taiwanese success and then Korean success is very much state-led and then very much export-oriented. And then they were able to achieve economic development from 1960s to 1970s and 80s. So based on this Korean experience in the economy and society, people are easily drawing that analogy. And then likewise, since Korea made an economic development based on the state plan, maybe they did the same thing with the cultural and media economy, but I would say it's still not true. I just mentioned public diplomacy is also strengthening that kind of wrongful image, but the pop industry is different from public diplomacy, and pop culture belongs to the market and consumers. The goal of pop culture business and industry is to become successful in artistic performance, business transactions, and in these industrial developments. The pop cultural people, actors, actresses, producers, directors, have nothing to do with the public diplomacy, But once become successful, the impact of pop culture goes beyond cultural consumption, but expands every aspect of social and individual lives. So the public diplomacy and then pop culture don't dwell in the same house, but they are mutually complementary, and their audiences are largely overlapping, right? Public diplomacy means a government intentional persuasive communication activity targeting other nations' people, not their own nation's people. Like the good example is the cultural center, Korean Cultural Center in Hong Kong. If you go to the Central, there is a Korean Cultural Center. And then they try to promote Korean culture of everything, traditional culture, modern culture, pop culture, they do all kind of activities for the purpose of public diplomacy. But no companies would be doing that, They do it to make money. Public diplomacy, they do it with spending their own money. So in any case, the overemphasized contribution of the government effort for the rise of the K-pop can be read as a stealing of credit from the private sector. And this, I think, is important, The success of the K-pop is fundamentally indebted to the business people, to the industry people, to the artists, and even to the consumers, not to the government. So if the government is trying to say that they really made a substantial contribution, I would say that's simply an act of theft, and they shouldn't do that. Now we are trying to advise the government, be careful about this. But as I said at the beginning, Korean government, it's also true that the Korean government tried to help, Korean pop culture or cultural industries thriving and developing even further, So they do have their policies, state policy on any industry, not only pop culture, but economic culture, policies or financial policies, welfare policies. So any government do have this kind of policies. The British government has a very strong policy for creating and for helping creative industries. China has it, the US has it. Now Hong Kong government is paying a lot of attention on developing policies on creative industries. When the country comes into the policies in any area, the policies are coming in two major ways. One is regulation, the other is promotion. Okay. Regulation for contents, market entry, competition, ownership, technological standard. A lot of regulations are necessary for the development of any industry, For example, any government is regulating very strongly on pornography, for example, or on violent contents, or on gambling on the website, right? So any government is, and then if there's no regulation by the government, then all the contents will easily become trash with a lot of violence and sex and all like the pornographies, So the government regulation on the contents can actually provide a sound environment for the development. Not only that kind of content regulation, but the market regulation. No monopoly, no duopoly, no oligopoly. By regulating the market, the government wants to keep the market in the most ideal competitive situation. So in that way, the government comes into the contribution. The ownership control. Like in Hong Kong, everything is belonging to Lee Ka-sing. That's very long, no good. If everything belongs to one, big corporation, competition will die and the industry cannot develop. So ownership control by regulation is again very interesting and then very important. And the government policy comes into this kind of ways, technological standard, or the infrastructures, developing infrastructures. Other type of government policy comes in promotion for industrial development by constituting the helping agencies like a KOKA. KOKA is a Korean, organization for creative culture agency or something, So through this organization, this is government-funded organization, Korean government tried to do like market research, promotional projects, sometimes, making some investment fundings, and similar promotional agencies in music, film, broadcasting, game, animation. Okay, so these are the ways how Korean government is involving into the developing market. So for the interest of time, I should just pass, the case of concrete ways. I prepared actually how Korean government is engaging in the case of game industry, how game industry is being developed, and what is the role of the government. For example, game industry has a double like edge. On the one way, it could be a nice entertainment and then money-making industry. But on the other hand, it could create a social ill. If young kids are crazy about game addict, it could create a social problems. So how then government is very, very careful how we can discourage the side effect of gaming, and then at the same time, how we can save the creative part of game industry and then business success of game industry. This is obviously it sounds very difficult, job. And then the role of the government in this case comes with a lot of importance. Okay, so I provided some case studies here, but I guess we don't really have time to go for that.
Sorry, Shin-Dong,
So I'll just leave this, to Lisa. So maybe, you can share it with your student.
That would
afterwards.
be great. That's absolutely great. Thank you so much, Shin-Dong. And I should have, give the 2 hours for your
yes.
really rich lecture on the whole, how to adopt a more holistic and also critical, reflection on the kind of discourse because we were talking about discourse, right? Exactly. I totally agree how you caution us to be critical about whatever we read on the website, right? And and this is exactly what the government is fashioning a discourse about their role in creative industries. When we also see the problems that could come when the government takes over this kind of discourse and assume that the state is fashioning this. What could be the problems, right? of course, I think the whole, issue about state intervention is, of course, to make use of media products or cultural products on a national level to boost, the national image even, right? So when we talk about Korean Wave as a kind of brand, right, globalized, popular cultural brand, how this brand helps to, boost and promote the nation's image. So the whole, how you suck, the whole, media products into, becoming a national machine or national project. So, and of course, thanks to Professor Kim to talk about, well, actually, if the state is so happy, to claim all this credit from the media industry, what could be the other problems, right? The rise of the regulation and control and censorship, but also the state having to balance between, the kind of rise of the kind of creativity of game industry, but also that could cause a lot of other kind of discourses about moral discourses, about addiction, right? About sex and pornography, about violence. How can the state, as a kind of, sort of a political and moral leader, have to cope with this, right? And we see, that, the state is kind of, running around like headless chicken in different, especially state-controlled economies, right? So there are many, many questions that we could actually ask Professor Kim, and I think in the interest of time, Yunman is asking a question that comics industry is also rising rapidly. Like, for example, All of Us Are Dead, True Beauty. These comics are turned into dramas. How would you comment on this situation, and what are the reasons behind you think that contribute to this new trend? Maybe 1 minute answer. So
So this is a very keen and an interesting question, and I'm very glad to know that some of you are paying attention on this part, because Webtoon is becoming a fast-growing cultural industries in Korea and around the world. And traditionally, the cartoon market, if you see the cartoon market, Japan is number one, and the gap between number one and number two is the US, is enormous. The Japanese cartoon is really dominating the global cartoon market, and followed by the US, Germany, France, UK, Italy, and Korea ranked as 7th in 2012. Korea's rank is around there from 5 to 7 in the last 10 years. But if you see the Webtoon is different types of cartoon migrated from papers to the website, and then the Webtoon is really initiated by the Koreans, and the Korean Webtoon is growing really fast, and then it's even spreading to the US market and then the Japanese market. So the Japanese Webtoon platform and then US Webtoon platform is actually Korean now. And the Webtoon is growing even faster. Understandably, the paper market is dying, and then the electronic devices are dominating. So the Webtoon has become a place with the creative ideas, maybe because of the characteristics of the cartoon. In the world of cartoon, you are creating all kind of, creative, imaginative things. So many movies or dramas are taking the ideas from the cartoons and then from the Webtoons. And so the, flourishing of the Webtoon markets in Korea is becoming a very nice source for the creative ideas for the movie making or the Netflix series. So, and the cartoon market in Korea was never a small, part. So I think in the coming future, the Webtoon industry in Korea and then in globe will keep growing and growing, and then Korea will, out of questions, definitely one of the top 3 countries in the world in producing Webtoons.
Well, thank you so much, Shin Dong. And yeah, I do believe that yes, this is also a result of the further, technology, internet technology, where you can actually express creativity through animation, right? And I think this is definitely attracting a lot of, young global audience, and which I think, South Korean media industries are trying to diversify further, right? Trying to create another wave, from K-pop. Because I think it really is a kind of global implosion already of, popular music, right? Not just about K-pop. So I think you could see that, South Korea industries are definitely on the edge. I also remember when I, was interviewed in 2005 by the Korean research institutes, like, how can we sustain the Korean wave? Like, already back in 2005, they were really thinking about that. And so, I think it's also this kind of drive that, and the pressure of sustainability, right, that we're always looking at to sustain this wave. But anyway, I think the students would have a lot of questions, I hope, which we will carry through when we have our tutorial discussion tomorrow, when we will be looking at some of the articles about, South Korean government creative industry policies. So I really do encourage students to continue on asking these questions and reflecting on, the very, very rich lecture that Professor Kim has given us. And thank you so much for, your generous sharing of slides. And so, could we have a big hand, clap, 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 whatever you want to
Thank you very much.
to show our gratitude to Professor Kim's time. He sacrificed his lunch already. You can see that he's looked very hungry. We all look very hungry.
Yeah, time for lunch.
Yeah, I've known Professor Kim for many, many years, and he, out of a lot of, Korean scholars, have been, helping the global, audience and students, to, know more about, dig deeper into the South Korean case. So thank you so much once again. And so, yeah, so, okay, thank you very much. And thank you, everyone.